With the combine behind us, a whole lot of you have questions about the direction for the Bengals at pick number 28. Let's get into those questions in this week's mailbag.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, bringing you coverage of your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So hit the subscribe button on YouTube, hit the follow button anywhere you get your podcasts. You'll be notified when we upload our content every day, and you can join that first listen club with the thousands of other Bengals fans who subscribe and listen to Locked On Bengals every day. And James, we're going to dive into a bunch of questions about the draft today in our mailbag. But first, let's get out of the way the Joe Mixon residence news. There are precious few details available about this, but there were shots fired at or near Joe Mixon's residence. There was a police presence at Joe Mixon's residence. That's really all we know at this point. Maybe a few more details than that, but the nature of exactly what happened there, we do not know at this time. There's an ongoing investigation, and the Bengals and fans will have to wait and see a little bit here for details because they're not available right now.
Yeah, no arrests made as of now, as we record this. And this was late Monday night, early Tuesday morning. And really the only thing that the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office has confirmed is that the crime scene involves a home connected to Joe Mixon. Doesn't say that Mixon was there, doesn't say that Mixon was involved, doesn't say anything. And so we know that. We know a juvenile was taken to the hospital, children's hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. And so really the only thing I can say is I hope that the juvenile's okay and makes a fast recovery. And who knows, by the time you hear this, we might have more info on if Joe was involved, if someone he's, tied to is involved. But as of now, we don't have much. So we figured we would at least hit that at the top before we dive into your questions here on the mailbag.
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, the health of the juvenile. Good call there. Hope he's okay or she's okay or they're okay, and hope that nobody was maliciously involved and that this gets resolved. But we simply don't know more than that at this point. That being said, and that out of the way, we'll see what resolves there. And if something comes of it, of course, we'll talk about it when we have the information. Right now, we don't. So let's get into the mailbag. Shift gears, get back to some football-related topics here. Many of you curious about the direction for the Bengals at pick 28. Andrew Russell, who many of you perhaps follow on Twitter, is our first question today, James, at Andrew_Russell7. What is your favorite, but somewhat realistic, pick for the Cincinnati Bengals at 28?
Which wide receiver could I name? No, I'm just kidding. Even though
You're not kidding.
Jackson Smith and Jigba would be fun. I mean, that dude,
you're not kidding.
Ooh, it would be fun. No, I'm actually not there. The weapons I'm thinking of are tight ends and running backs. And so my favorite realistic pick, it's tough because I know what happens when you keep Joe Burrow upright. And so to me, Darnell Wright has moved a little higher for me. And part of it's just information, right? And it moved higher. Well, I don't know if I really had him where I had him pre-combine. All I know is what I've heard and the fact that he tested really well. And so should he be in the mix at 28? I think absolutely he'll be in the mix at 28. Jones from Ohio State is just a mammoth of a man. I'm currently watching Game of Thrones, so don't send me spoilers, but man, he's the mountain, right? He gets off the bus and he looks like that dude. And so would either of those guys be cool to have at right tackle? I'd say so. And so that is the easy way to go about it. But to me, it really depends on, so I'm going to say tackle, offensive tackle. But that's with the caveat that the Bengals are willing to go get one of these high-powered running backs that's going to upgrade that room. And also, get one, maybe two tight ends. I love Sam Laporta. If you could get him at pick 60, and then you double back and get one of these other tight ends later in the draft. And I think that there's a very real possibility that this is a 2 double dip tight end draft. And I've tried to really hammer that home, and people roll their eyes. That room isn't young. And even if you re-sign Hayden Hurst, now is probably the time to get a couple of young bodies in there. So we'll see if they do that. Certainly they're going to draft one regardless. And so my preference would be a stud tackle because they're hard to find, but then hit on all these other spots that they're clearly looking at and scouting and meeting with players at those respective positions. Hit on those other spots so we can really see this offense hit another level in 2023.
If you could get one of those tackles, I agree with you. That would be great. But the Peter Skoronskis, the Paris Joneses, the Paris Johnsons, the Broderick Joneses aren't going to be there. So if you have Anton Harrison or Darnell Wright or DeJuan Jones as first rounders, then one of those guys would make sense. And they all do different things at different levels and have different strengths and weaknesses. The one guy you didn't mention that I want to throw out is Kalijah Cansey. I think that for now, that still feels somewhat realistic. Like it's possible. It's possible he's gone in the teens too.
It's possible all of these guys we've named are gone.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, that's the tough thing when you talk about pick 28, like the ideal realistic pick. We can name a bunch of guys and then they could all be drafted.
And last year, that was the case. There was one left. Of all the guys we talked about, there was one that ended up being there at 31. So there are a few picks earlier this year. So you hope that helps. But yeah, there's not going to be many of them available for sure when pick 28 rolls around.
Another one that would be fun would be Nolan Smith potentially. But, the weight question for him is a real question at 237 at the combine. So, it's a tough question this year, James, because for most of these guys, you could say, oh, well, if this happened, you're pretty much, to me, it's just like a faller. Find the faller this year at a premium position if you can and make the pick.
Sure.
And if that's not there, then you have to have a plan B, obviously. And the Bengals are doing a lot of homework on the tight end position. Tucker Kraft, another combine meeting, formal meeting that was reported on Tuesday. So a lot of tight ends. They're clearly, as you said, targeting that position. Will it be in the first round? It's really hard right now. And there's the other thing that makes it hard. I don't know if you've noticed this, and I feel like I've said this in previous years. There seems to me to be less consensus this year. I think I said that last year too. And then consensus kind of formed after the combine. This year, I'm not feeling that consensus forming around, especially like the last 10 picks of the first round.
Yeah. But I agree. It's just tough when it's this late. And I found myself more this year, and even last year, giving we'll see. As of now, I feel this way because it's just really tough, and it could change so much. When you're picking early, it was Chase Sewell for 3 months, and that's just kind of where we were. We talked about other guys, but it was the 5th pick. We kind of knew how it was going to play out, and that was that. You're talking about 4 or 5 guys, maybe a bucket of guys. There's like 10 to 12 scenarios, right? 10 to 12 different guys, and in maybe more, but 10 to 12. And that could change between now and a month from now. Obviously, we have free agency next week, which we'll have you covered on here on Locked On Bengals. It's fun. It's interesting. And I still feel like if they could, and I said this at the end of the show yesterday with Mike, and check out our episode with Mike Renner if you missed it, but if you could move back like 8 spots and get another day 2 pick, I feel like that's probably right. At the same time, you might miss out on all of these guys. Like I said, I think Hill was kind of the last one last year. So is it worth doing that? I don't know. I don't think so. But then I look at some of these mocks and I do think so. And so that's the dynamic. That's the tough dilemma that they're going to have to deal with. Also, I wanted to answer your question, this first mailbag question with Anthony Richardson, but I didn't have the guts to tell a funny at that level. So I didn't, and I went with the wide receiver.
All right. Well, at least you told us now. It would have been good.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody would have bought it is a problem. Like, it's so far out of the realm of plausibility. Anyway, let's continue our mailbag questions with some guys that have caught our eye. And I want to touch on something you just mentioned about all those possible scenarios when we come back in next.
Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and that means it's time for you to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. What's the no-sweat first bet? Up to $1,000. It's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So maybe you want to wager on the NFL draft, or you want to wager on the NBA. How about the Cavaliers coming back against the Celtics? Whew, that was a fun one. And well, if you're going to say you're going to make both free throws, Mr. Williams, at least make one free throw. Did you see that? I certainly did. Jake's like, what the heck are you talking about? The point is if you're watching the NBA, you might as well start wagering on it right now with FanDuel. And whether it's a same game parlay, whether it's prop bets, whether it's over-unders, you can do all of those things with FanDuel. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you get and go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
So you mentioned something, James, that I wanted to just quickly run through before we go to our next question, which was like all those possible scenarios we're talking about at the end of the first round right now. So I just want to name a bunch of guys that I think are currently in play for that pick that may or may not be available, but are in play. So Darnell Washington, Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid at tight end, 3 tight ends. At tackle, I think Darnell Wright, Anton Harrison, DeJuan Jones, maybe even someone else, but those are the guys. So that's 6, right? I don't think necessarily anybody on the interior offensive line, but maybe, I don't know. Nobody's jumping out at me, so we'll skip that one for now. At edge, I think there's probably a bunch of guys that they would consider picking there. They met with Nolan Smith, so let's throw Nolan Smith into the mix. I think that probably Lucas Van Ness tested himself out of their range, was previously in that range on the consensus board a couple of weeks ago. Probably not there anymore. BJ Ojulari, maybe. Maybe that's a little bit rich for him, but I think the point is that there's probably a couple of edge guys there. Interior defensive line, I think 100% Kalijah Kancey is in play. Brian Bresee from Clemson, and I might be butchering that name, probably in play. Probably nobody at linebacker. At corner, I mean, Keely Ringo they met with, Emmanuel Forbes they met with, Clark Phillips they met with, Joey Porter Jr. I saw not go in the first round of a mock on Tuesday. I think he would be in consideration. Yes. Cam Smith, another name there. The Maryland corner Deontay Banks probably in play. I mean, a bunch of corners, right? 4 or 5 corners you could probably mention. How many names is that?
You're at 6, 9, 14, 18, roughly like 18. And I think you're missing 2. I still think Bijan Robinson and Jackson Smith and Jigba are both. Now, will Njigba be there? I don't know. I don't know if Robinson does. He might fall. It's a deep running back class. He might.
I doubt it. But yeah, that's why I didn't mention those 2 because
that's 19 to 20.
Yeah.
19 to 20. And I agree with you. And that's
we're probably missing some guys, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. But so yeah, a ton of possibilities. And some of those guys are going to go 45th or 50th, or you're going to be like, oh, well, they make it to pick 60 and they don't. They get sniped at 55, and some are going to go 15th because it's just tough to predict who's going to be there, who's not. Next question comes from @WhoDay with about 32 Ys 1, because WhoDay with about 32 Ys was already taken. If Michael Mayer, Darnell Washington, and DeJuan Jones are all taken off the board, or all on the board, who do you take? Or do you risk trading down into one of the first picks of the second round if someone calls?
If it's one of the first picks of the second round, I mean, I'm always answering that call. If you can add like a 4th round pick, early 4th round pick to move back from 28 to 35, 36, I think I'm always entertaining that option. But Which Darnell do you think this is? Right or Washington?
Right. Ooh, I assume right, but maybe it's Washington. Let's just make it both. If Mayer, Wright, Washington, Jones are available.
For me, that probably comes down to Mayer or one of the tackles. Right now, I think I'm a little bit on DeJuan Jones, and a lot of that's because we talked to Mike Renner yesterday. We know Mike really likes DeJuan Jones.
Well, he's the mountain.
He's so big.
Yep.
If you and he's not like an entire lumber. I know he didn't test, and he's not going to have elite movement or anything, but it's certainly good enough, and he's skilled enough at his size, and he carries the weight well.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, you get like the rarest player in DeJuan Jones there. The next rarest would probably be Darnell Washington in terms of his size and movement ability. But that doesn't mean he's the next on my list. I think it probably would go like Jones, Mayer, Wright, Washington, maybe. I don't know. Subject to change.
I would have it Jones, Wright. Mayer and Washington's tight because here's the thing, and I felt like this certainly in 2010 when they drafted Jermaine Gresham, and then in 2013, Eifert was clearly BPA, but they didn't get the best tight end in that class. Like even if he hits his ceiling, he doesn't become Travis Kelce, and you never could have said Kelce. But the point is, if you invest a first round pick in a tight end, man, you want to think he has that high end ceiling. And what's Mayer's end game? A multi-time Pro Bowler, probably. But Washington, is he just this super freak all pro stud? I don't know. I probably lean Mayer a little bit because I think he would help them more now. And I'm in the now business. I'm in the get the Lombardi now. But I really like Washington a lot. So I think you feel good about any of them. But if I had to rank it, I'd say Jones, Wright, Mayer, Washington. Close. And it's a good problem to have, especially if all four are on the board.
What if Mayer is Mark Andrews? And that's
well then it's a home run.
The thing that sells me on Mayer was a conversation with Mike yesterday about how he can get open.
Sure.
It's not just, we talked about for a lot of tight ends, and this is probably true right now of Darnell Washington, who has the athleticism to improve in this area, but he's not separating. He's not a guy that's going to go out there and get open on his own. He's not going to, like Mike said, run a speed out or something like that and be able to get separation at the top of that route, where Michael Mayer, maybe it's not a speed out, but he's shown the ability to create that separation.
He was a number one receiver for Notre Dame. Like if you watch Notre Dame games, and I didn't watch every single one, but it was all right. How do we get the ball to Michael Mayer and find ways to get him involved on third down? It was sort of like how the Chiefs use Kelce, where it's a big play and all eyes are on 87. It's kind of how it was for the Fighting Irish. Now it's different. They didn't have Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, but that's really how it felt.
Yeah. I bring up Mark Andrews just as an example of a tight end who didn't have incredible testing. He ran 0.03 seconds faster in the 40. He had a really good 10-yard split to his credit, but he didn't jump as well as Michael Mayer did. His jumps were worse. He's like a half inch taller, a handful of pounds heavier. So, people are knocking Michael Mayer for his testing. His testing is fine. It's just not freak level. Mm-hmm. But like, I'm pointing out Andrews because you don't need that freak level testing to be a really good NFL tight end.
Especially when number 9 is throwing you the ball. Like Mark Andrews would be unbelievable. And not that he hasn't been with Lamar, but kidding me? Can you imagine Joe Burrow? He got Uzama paid. He's going to get Hurst paid somewhere. Michael Mayer, like I think it would work. And so ultimately I would have him ahead of Washington because again, I think he would make them instantly, not just better as a blocker, which obviously Washington can do, but he's going to be that added threat. So if you're double teaming T and you're double teaming Jamar Chase in the AFC Championship game, what could be like, all right, I'm going to go to 87 here on 3rd and 8, and someone's going to be open because 87 is not going to be guarded one-on-one. And
it's a very interesting position. And there's a lot that goes into it. And one of the reasons that I'm higher on Mayer is because of the versatility of his skill set his ability to separate and get open. And it kind of comes down to your philosophy on the position, which a lot of people are curious about, and is one of the questions we're going to get to finish up the show here coming up next. Before we get to that question, James,
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to a Joe Goodberry question. Goodberry's in the mailbag, James.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. You can find him at Joe Goodberry on Twitter. He might be a person. I don't know.
Might be a human being, or he's just a talking head with Bengals on the brain.
Might be a guy who works over on the Cincinnati Bengals Talk YouTube channel.
Yeah, I think so. I think he makes an appearance here and there.
His question is, which players are you now intrigued by? Maybe you just hadn't been very aware of their existence before the combine, or maybe the combine really elevated them in your eyes. Who jumps out for you, James?
Well, I think Darnell Wright is sort of number one for me on this, and I won't beat a dead horse here, but I think people were higher on him than I was, but then he weighed in at 333. I was like, oh, and then he ran well. I'm like, all right, well, maybe that's a good pick at 28. So that would be one for me. I think Nolan Smith testing the way he did, even though he is light, 237. I mean, I'm a few built bars away from 237. I might catch Nolan Smith by the end of the year weight-wise, but I'm kidding. But that is someone that certainly caught my eye. Outside of that, I mean, nothing really shocked me at the combine. I was underwhelmed by some guys. I was hoping some of these fast, speedy receivers would have ran well. And in this class, I still think they would have fallen. I don't think they would have been top 50 picks necessarily. And, the kid from Houston didn't run well. And that's ultimate red flag because he's tiny. He's smaller than I am. You'd expect him to run fast, like fast. Tyler Scott as well. I was thinking he could be, second, third round. Now I don't know. And we'll see. So I don't think there are a ton of guys that was like, oh, man, I can't believe they did that. It just kind of confirmed some things that I thought. The size of the cornerback class, I think, is something that I like. I think the Bengals nab a corner. And the number of super athletic tight ends. I guess the one athletic tight end from he tested. He was the best tight end in history. What's his name?
That would be
Kuntz.
Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion.
Old Dominion. So he's on my radar now. Wasn't on my radar. So you should throw him in there. And then Blake Freeland tested really well too, even though he weighs less than us combined. And he's 6'7", which I guess most of these guys should weigh less than both of us combined. But you're pretty light, so maybe not.
I'm adding weight, James. Come on. Tank Dell is a wide receiver.
Tank Dell, yeah. I thought he was on a 4.3, and he was not in that range.
Yeah, didn't test great. I still like Tank Dell.
Tape is great. I watched him crush UC in the American Athletic Conference Championship a few years ago.
Yeah, I think for me, this is tight ends and corners too, but I was pretty aware, I think, of most of the corners. But like Tucker Kraft, I had seen people talking about, but he's, South Dakota State, small school, similar to Cordell Volson, North Dakota State last year, the other Dakota State to continue to offend Matt Minnick, who was not happy that I called South Dakota State the other Dakota State, which is really only in reference to Cordell Volson. Sorry, Matt. Zach Kuntz, you mentioned. Luke Schoonmaker. I'm not actually, I don't remember. Mike pronounced his name for us yesterday, and I don't remember if the CH is hard or soft. And Will Mallory. Not Will Mallory. It's just those three. Schoonmaker, Kuntz, Kraft. Those three guys, a tight end from Old Dominion, South Dakota State, and a nearly 25-year-old in Schoonmaker from Michigan are some guys that I wasn't really aware of, tested really well, and now I would like to go see.
I was pleased with Josh Wiley as well. I thought he tested the way I expected him to. Just throwing him out there, you know me.
Yeah, I just knew who he was.
Some Bearcats, sure. Yeah.
But that's size. A good one. If you don't know who he was.
But the tight end class, like, it's legit, and I really do. I think that they're having a conversation. Like, might be nice to grab two of these guys at some point. I'm going to keep hammering that home because I think it's realistic.
One other tackle, Jalen Duncan, very light, needs to add weight from Maryland. I think he weighed under 300 pounds at 6'5.5", but tested really well. So I think he might not be, to use a Mike Renner term, playable play strength right now, if I'm remembering correctly. Reading what Renner had to say about
We could change that.
Duncan, but it's something that's at least intriguing.
No doubt. And especially at that spot, if you don't go tackle 28, you're going to have to take a flyer on someone that has something he's going to, and they all have to work on stuff, but some kind of flaw that you're going to have to develop.
I just remembered one other guy who's a corner, but this is a corner that I wasn't aware of. Iowa corner. You know who I'm talking about?
Go ahead.
I know I'm Riley Moss. I couldn't find his name for a second. Riley
I
Moss.
thought you had it. I thought you were building up the suspense.
No, I just forgot. Riley Moss is a guy who is like a late day 2, early day 3 guy by consensus right now. Then he went out and tested in the 99th percentile for corners. He's older, 23 at the time of the draft, but is a guy that I want to go watch now too, who I wasn't aware of before. But some on Bengals Twitter were. Some people were on him before.
Last question.
All right.
And we're going to go from corner to tight end. Dylan Gaffney. It looks like the coaches want to draft a tight end. What's your preferred approach on the tight end position? First round stud versus later round value, playmaker versus utility player, example blocker. Who's the best fit for the Bengals scheme?
The answer to all of these questions to me is dependent on what they do in free agency. If you bring back Hayden Hurst, especially if you give him a 2 or 3 year deal, then I'm less inclined to draft a guy like Dalton Kincaid. If they don't bring in a Hayden Hurst type on a short or medium term deal, then Dalton Kincaid becomes a lot more appetizing to me. Say, I know he's too old for this, but say Mercedes Lewis is the 1 year tight end this year for the Bengals. I know he's in his late 30s, and this is probably not a move the Bengals would make, but he still played pretty well last year. And he does what he does very well.
He's a freak. Yeah. He's such a freak that he gets no play.
So like if it's Mercedes Lewis, well, now I don't really want the Darnell Washington, the Michael Mayer, the inline guys. I want one of these move guys like Kincaid or Laporta or Musgrave. And so and the Bengals have taken this approach, and I think they'll continue to do it. You want one guy who you feel really comfortable moving, can do a little bit for you in line. You want one guy who you're comfortable really putting in line all the time. That was the plan with Hayden Hurst and Drew Sample this year. Obviously didn't work out that way with Sample with his injury. But I don't see why that plan would change for them or why it should change necessarily. Like, it's hard to have two guys at tight end who you want to have on the field, but neither of them can block. It's just schematically, I think, kind of difficult to do that in most formations.
I agree. I think that they'll look for guys, and Kincaid's special with the ball in his hands and just so fluid that they can make an exception, or they're at least going to explore the possibility of taking him. But I think most of the guys they take, they're going to be like, all right, maybe he's not known for his blocking, Hurst, for example, but we know he's willing to do it, and we're going to make him to where he's at least okay at it. And so as long as you could get to okay, I think that they're in on you from a blocking standpoint. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't prefer an all-around guy like a Michael Mayer. But that's also why part of me thinks that they're going to do, the double dip and take one of these. If they go early, even if they take a Mayer, they're like, all right, well, there's so many athletes on the board here at tight end, and it's hard to find these guys. Let's grab one more to develop and see if we can hit on both. And it's worked. It's worked for a lot of teams that have done that. The Bengals have double dipped a ton. What I think, can they get more athletic at that spot, more explosive, all those things that we've talked about? Sure. And they might be able to do that without taking one in the first round. So it just depends on how they feel, what they view is the best, their best allocation of resources. And the other part of this, do they want to go to more 12 personnel or not? And that's something that we don't know. If they're willing to do that or want to do that, it's one of the two. If they want to do that, well, then you're going to need to get better at tight end. and deeper at tight end. And this is the draft to do it. So even if you do sign Hayden Hurst, you're going to want a guy that can block some and certainly run routes and win. And so you might see the Michael Mayer early. And if you don't re-sign Hayden Hurst, well, they may say, okay, well, Dalton Kincaid's there. He's older, but man, he's going to give us that dynamic receiving option. And this receiver class stinks. And we might not be able to replace Boyd. So let's bring him in. So I think it's interesting. I don't think there's a right versus wrong. It's just find the right players that can contribute on this offense, and an offense that should be, man, my expectations are getting even higher. Assuming they address right tackle, I expect this offense to be a top 5 offense this year. And that should be, I think, everybody's expectation.
Should be at least as good as last year. I think what I'm coming around to is my ideal scenario is Sam Laporta in the second round. And some premier position, tackle, defensive line, some faller corner in the first round.
You know what that means?
Laporta in the second round.
That means Laporta won't be there at 60.
I don't think he will.
Because
I think there's a really good chance that he's gone in the 50s or 40s.
I love the idea of getting him. This guy who's just great with the ball in his hands. He's light. Okay, who cares? Super athletic. 4.59.
It's 250. It's not that light.
No, you're right. It's not 245. Don't round up now. He got light.
I'm not rounding up. These are our numbers, so it must have changed from some number to a combine number.
He was listed at listed at 249. So that's probably where. And then he was 245. But if you're running a 4.59, but you're right, he isn't that light. And I'm sure he's shown the willingness, even if he's not a great blocker, the willingness to do so. So if you're getting him at 60, sign me up, especially if you've just addressed offensive tackle. I mean, could you imagine that if they get Jones or Wright or Harrison, and then in round 2 they're able to get Laporta and they had high grades on both? Yeah.
That generally feels pretty good to me right now. Is one of those tackles and Laporta, or like can't see Laporta or falling corner Laporta, like all those feel pretty good to me right now. Depending on like what they do in free agency at tackle, that's the big wild card there, the big asterisk,
which we'll talk about, and that's going to be a fun show as well. How will they address the trenches in free agency? Because I think they have to. Spoiler. So we'll see how they do.
Yeah, we'll see how they do. Indeed. Hopefully it is something. And we will talk about free agency. Free agency will have to be the focus here. I know the combine did just end, and all of our questions today were about the combine, but we are, as of the time of recording, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days away from the opening of that legal tampering period. One of the questions we didn't get to, James, was, will the Bengals have a signing announced at essentially the opening of the tampering period, free agency? And I think we can both agree that is much less likely.
See, we were on different pages there. We can discuss that. We can discuss that on a later edition of Locked On Bengals.
I still don't believe you. Until next time, Bengals fans, thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.